Today's scripture reading comes from Psalm 8, 3-4. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. The word of the Lord.
You may be seated.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonah, and I have the tremendous honor and privilege of introducing today's chapel speaker. Jeff Tacklind is the lead pastor at Little Church by the Sea in Laguna Beach, which is the church I attend back home. And to give just a little personal bit about my relationship with him and the church, when I moved to Laguna Beach my sophomore year of high school, I was really scared. I was really nervous. I didn't know who I was, and I didn't know if I was going to find a community there. And so going to Little Church by the Sea and feeling so tremendously loved and accepted, and hearing Jeff speak on Sundays with such profundity and wisdom and love and compassion, it really opened up my heart and my mind to God in ways I never thought possible. And so I'm just so overjoyed that he gets to speak at another institution that has so profoundly shaped me and spurred me on in my faith. So if you would join me now in welcoming up Pastor Jeff Tacklind.
Well, it's an honor to be with you guys today. God, don't you love Jonah? What a good man. Well, I understand it's Creation Care Week, and I just want to be honest that I don't know how qualified I am to speak to such an important topic as this. I am not an environmentalist. I'm not an activist. I'm not a biologist. I'm not even a farmer. Although we do have 4 chickens. And raising chickens in Laguna Beach, it's not the easiest thing, but it's actually my wife that does it, and she's here. This is Patty. I love the outdoors, though. And I love to surf, I love to rock climb, I love to backpack. And I had a chance a few years ago to take my son for the first time backpacking. Anybody backpack at all? All right, yeah. See, and we were in the middle of the first 5 miles of just straight switchbacks up to this ridge, and he asked me, Dad, what is it that you love so much about backpacking? And he was probably going, seriously, what do you love about this? It's exhausting. And what came out, it kind of surprised me, but I said, I think it's when I'm out and immersed in nature that I'm able to see and hear God more than anywhere else. And he, of course, said, why is that? And I've been kind of unpacking that, but the first thought that comes to mind is that the outdoors, it just gets me out of my head. I'm a pretty cerebral guy and introverted, and that whole Sherlock mind palace thing, I can totally relate to, right? This safe place to kind of work life out inside. And but I realize this, that as I listen for God's voice inside, indoors, his voice tends to sound a lot like my own. I've heard that we have a tendency to worship a flattering image of ourselves. And there's something about nature that holds me accountable. There's something about nature that is bigger than me, that draws me out. It forces me to step back and take a bigger look. Augustine called creation the book of nature, and mentioned that he thought it was God's first language, that creation and beauty is the language that God originally spoke, and through it he communicates who he is. Through the beauty, through the power, through the depth of it. Through it he's drawing us in. When I pray and I'm inside myself, I have a tendency to move towards comfort. I have a tendency to move away from critique to that place where I'm affirmed. And when I stay indoors and I pray indoors, God tends to tell me, just keep doing what you're doing, Jeff. You're doing great. But when I go outdoors, all of a sudden I'm humbled. It gets bigger. I like how Anne Lamott says, you can safely assume you've created God in your own image when it turns out that God hates all the same people you do. Right? God votes the way you do. God likes the same music you listen to, right? And the outdoors, right, it's so much bigger than us. And there's something that actually is very comforting about that, because when I tell my own small story, I have a tendency to bore even myself. That comfortable story that I create is too small even for me. I remember the other day I was driving into the Whole Foods parking lot, and a lady stepped right out in front of me, and I slammed on the brakes of my truck, just missed hitting her, and she didn't even realize. She was just staring at her phone, and I thought, what are you doing? Are you taking a picture? And then she started like flicking up, and I was like, oh, you're catching a Pokemon right now. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, like this little virtual world and then the actual reality coming in. You know, I think that we can tend to live in these small spaces, but reality is harder than that. It's bigger than that. I remember one time rock climbing and taking a big fall and shattering my ankle, and you realize when you hit reality that you're breakable. It's what we bump into when we're wrong. I think that's what Dallas Willard says. Reality is what we bump into when we're wrong. I remember going one time to a convention called E3, and it's this big tech convention and video games and all that stuff. And there was this banner on the front, I think it was a Mountain Dew billboard, that said, because we realize that killing the dragon and saving the princess is more important than your day job. And I thought, that's kind of hilarious and kind of disturbing. But it seems to suggest a direction maybe that we're moving kind of towards this small in our head world. And creation is beckoning us to get outside of our minds. We put off so much artificial light in our cities that we can't even see the stars, but when you get into the outdoors, it's all of a sudden majestic. And I remember one time I was watching this documentary on the Hubble, and they were saying back in 1995, the director of the program had the opportunity. I guess each one has sort of the privilege of pointing it for like 10 days anywhere they want. And so for 10 days, he pointed it at what was seen to be the darkest place in the night sky. And he said, I'm just going to leave it there for 10 days, developing, like seeking the light that's there and taking an image of it. And I want to put the image up. This is referred to as the ultra deep field. Has any of you seen this photo before? This is light that's like 13 billion years old, 3 times the age of the Earth. Each one of those dots is a galaxy, meaning billions of stars. And some of them, you get this picture not only of the beauty, this incredible light and all the complexity that's there, but there's even like galaxies that are devouring other galaxies, and you realize what a wild world we live in. So much bigger than we can imagine. And when we look at that, it has a way of putting us in our proper place. As David writes in Psalm 8, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings, that you care for them. When you see that sort of beauty, but also the vastness of it, the immensity of it, it tends to collapse our little egocentric worlds. We realize that we're not that important and that life is just not about us. But this is this place, this humbling place where I think wisdom begins. It's the fear of the Lord, what we see about God in that place, the majesty, the splendor, the power. But the psalmist goes on and says, but you have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. And somehow this is true too. It's a paradox that each one of you is something so glorious and great and something so humble and insignificant at the same time. I was reading a book on physics recently where the author was talking about complementarity, and he said, you can know a deep truth because its opposite is also a deep truth. And that sort of paradox, I think, lies at all of our heart. Each one of us is glorious and humble. And we have a tendency to maybe want to compromise and meet those in the middle, but I love how Chesterton says, he says, Christianity got over the difficulty of combining furious opposites by keeping them both and keeping them furious. So I remember a time when I was going down to surf at Trestles, and it's my favorite place to surf, although it's a little bit like Disneyland because it's always crowded, but the waves are just, it's a playground for surfing. And it was on a day where there was a big swell that was coming, and the parking lot's about a mile away. You have to hoof it down there. And I remember being in the parking lot, and you could just hear the rumble of the waves and thinking, oh no, it's going to be really big. And getting down there before the sun came up and paddling out there with a friend, and sure enough, already it was packed, and the waves were big, and it was one of those days where guys were breaking leashes and snapping boards, and it was just sort of chaos. Every wave that came through, 4 or 5 guys would go all at once. And I was sitting out there, a big set was coming through, and I was paddling over and over, and each one, guys were taking off, until all of a sudden there was one more wave in the set, and there was nobody sitting out there but me. And I thought, oh, this is meant for me. And I turned around on this wave and dropped in, and it was so beautiful, and the sun was just up, and as I bottom turned, the whole lineup inside raised their arms like, oh. And I came down, I surfed this all the way to the end and kicked out, and my friend was there on the inside. And he goes, did you see that? And I was like, I was that. What are you talking about? And he goes, no, as you were bottom turning, 2 dolphins jumped out of the face of the wave. And I was like, oh, sure, yeah, totally, I saw that. Who didn't see that? And I was thinking, it just is to be such a picture of maybe me at my best, somewhere in between the glory and the humility, or both of these things. Because I think when I move to either or, I either get insecure or I get arrogant. But both of these things at once have a way of drawing out the very best in me, both the glory and the humility. And it takes courage. I love the worship this morning in that word, courage and bravery. I resist it, but I long for it. There's a story that's told by William Faulkner called The Bear. Has anybody read this short story? It's in his book, Go Down, Moses. And in this story, he talks about this character, Ike. And Ike is 10 years old. And he's been invited for the first time to hunt with the different men on this fall expedition. And the goal of this has always been this legendary bear named Old Ben. And Old Ben is enormous. And the dogs are afraid of him, and bullets don't hurt him. And Ben covers this 100 square mile territory and harasses the farmers, even carries off their livestock. And this massive bear of legend. And one night, he's taken under the wing of this man, Sam Fathers, who becomes kind of his hunting mentor. And Sam teaches him how to hunt. He teaches him patience, and he teaches him humility. And one night they hear the sounds of the dogs barking, and it gets really high-pitched, and that sound of fear. And Sam tells him, yeah, that's Old Ben. He's come to check out the hunters, and he does this every year. And one night as Ike is learning to track, he finds himself alone in the forest, and all of a sudden it goes totally quiet. All of a sudden there's no noise, and he feels just this presence that's there. And then it passes, the sound comes back, and Ike goes to Sam and he says, was that, I think I felt him. And he said, yeah. And he goes, but I couldn't see him. And he says, no, it was Ben that was doing the looking. Ben was coming to look at Ike, and Ike realizes that his desire is that he wants to see this bear. But he realizes that what he's going to have to do is lay down his rifle and put himself in this position of vulnerability. And so he does. He lays down his rifle, he continues to learn how to track, and he starts finding the footprints of the bear and following it deeper and deeper into the woods until he comes to that place further back than he's ever gone. and realizes it's going to cost him even more. And so he takes his staff and he takes his compass and he lays those down as well. And he walks into the forest. And as he's walking, he comes across a fresh footprint. It's half filled with water, and he realizes that he's close. And then he walks into the middle of this clearing, and there's the bear. And Faulkner writes, it did not appear, it was just there, immobile, fixed in the green and windless noon's hot dappling. Not as big as he dreamed it, but big as he had expected, bigger, dimensionless against the dappled obscurity looking at him. And the animal moves across the glade, pauses, looks at him, and then walks out. Jeremiah 29:13 says, you will seek me and find me when you seek with all your heart. And all our heart requires courage. It requires laying down our defenses, laying down our comforts, laying down our securities. This is the invitation. God's saying, you'll find me when you search with your whole heart. And that word courage just means simply to expose your heart, to be vulnerable. And that's where our eyes are open to greater realities surrounding us. When we see from this place of humility, courage, and vulnerability, we're seeing with what Scripture calls the eyes of the heart. In the outdoors, I think our eyes have the opportunity to be opened in ways that we can't when we're in the safety and confines of our own inner rooms. I love that statement that Jacob makes when he wakes from his dream and says, truly God was here, and I knew it not. When we go outdoors, we're faced with truth that makes us humble. We're faced with beauty that stretches us and draws us deeper into wonder. But it's not safe. There's a great story about John Muir. John Muir was the man who really developed so much of the Sierras, a great environmentalist and a passionate man for the outdoors. And he was staying with a friend of his, and the friend had invited him to this little cabin. And as he was there, this storm started to hit. And his friend was saying, this is why I made this cabin, so that we can weather out storms like this in comfort and safety. And then he looked up, and John Muir was putting on his raincoat. He said, what are you doing? And he said, I don't want to miss this. And John Muir went out, as the story goes, climbed to the top of the ridge, stood there, climbed to the top of this Douglas fir, and just hung on for his life in the middle of this storm. It's a beautiful image to me, and I think it extends an invitation that God makes as well to us. It's an approach to life that we're offered. I love the passion of that. I love the courage of that. And when we stay indoors, when we stay in that place of comfort and security again, we create these small stories that bore even us. And our hearts long for something of deep meaning and value. You guys are at a place where your talents are being perfected and you're drawing vision for what's next. But there's something in you, something glorious that God has placed there. It's like this diamond at your center. Thomas Merton says, this center is like a pure diamond, blazing with the invisible light of heaven. It's in everybody. And if we could see it, we would see these billions of points of light coming together in the face and blaze of a sun that would make all darkness and cruelty of life vanish completely. He says, I have no program for this scene. It's only given, but the gate of heaven is everywhere. And you guys are here on just this beautiful campus, surrounded by beauty. But we realize in our hearts that it's not just safety, it's familiarity that can dull us to the surroundings. And so we're reminded to keep our eyes open. We're reminded to live in that place of humility and courage. One of my favorite writers, his name is G.K. Chesterton, and he writes that the world will never starve for want of wonders, only for want of wonder. There's a great challenge in that for us, to keep our eyes open. He says this, he says, it's possible that God says every morning, do it again to the sun. Every evening, do it again to the moon. He says it may not be automatic necessity that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but has never got tired of making them. It may be that he has the eternal appetite of infancy, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. The question is, are our eyes open, and do we have hearts that search? Do we have the courage to go outdoors and to face the storm? Our hearts long for it. Bigger stories. And this glory that Merton was talking about, this diamond in the center of you, is not yours to possess. It's yours to steward. And that your life comes with a responsibility. Romans is going to say, we're responsible for seeing the beauty and seeing through it to the character of God. And in a similar way, we're responsible to see that value and glory in our hearts and then to invest it in things of deep meaning and things of deep value. 1 Corinthians 2:9 says, no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor mind can comprehend what God has in store for those who love him. I love that verse. It encourages us to dream. It encourages us to think big. This is my prayer for each one of you. My prayer is that your eyes will be opened to the beauty and the wonder of the world around you. That this beauty would compel you to step courageously away from your comfort and your control and vulnerably step into your true self in this greater story. And that if you would discover through this just how wide and deep the love of God is, knowledge that surpasses knowledge, that you would embrace the wildness and wonder of this life, and that you would be that pure diamond, that light of heaven to the world in such need of hope. It's an honor for me to be here with you guys. And as I draw this to a close, I would love to just pray a blessing over you today. That God would bless you and keep you. That God would make his face to shine on you and be gracious to you. That God would lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. Thanks so much for having me, you guys. You're dismissed.